We're going to talk about a bad man. A trumpet player like none other. I remember listening to this cat back in the 70s and going, oh my God, what technique, what finesse, what power, what strength, what a big fat sound. Ooh, gracious. We're talking about Mr. Freddie Hubbard, born in 1938 in Indy, baby, Naptown. For all you squares, I'm talking about Indianapolis, Indiana, Naptown, baby. Yeah, very great town for jazz. And I gotta say for food too and some other stuff. I love Indy. A lot of musicians there, a lot of great venues, a lot of great people. So, life is going along pretty well for Freddie and his family. I can't find a whole lot of information about the mom in terms of her name and whatnot, but because Freddie's older brother was a pianist who loved Bud Powell, and his name was Ermon Hubbard Jr., we have to assume that the father's name was Ermon. Well, Ermon Sr. disappeared from the family estate when Freddie was about 14. And things got real tough for the family. Because mom trying to hold things together with the kids that were left, and little Freddie being one of the youngest. One of the things that Freddie said about his mom is no matter how bad things got, and things did get bad. Things got bad in the 40s for a poor black family in Indianapolis, single mom. Things got bad. She made sure he always had a trumpet, as if she knew that was going to be his ticket out. She knew that was going to be his ticket out. So Freddie continued to explore his interest in this music, but he had to do some other stuff because there wasn't a lot of money. So he worked odd jobs like setting up bowling pins in the local bowling alleys and just collecting junk to sell, collecting wire and tin and that kind of stuff to sell, just bringing a little money into the house. He ended up going to Arsenal High School. And there he played a whole bunch of brass instruments. He played the tuba, he played the mellophone, and played the French horn, and he played the trumpet. And as it got close to his graduation, he was offered a scholarship to Central Indiana University. Yeah. And for French horn. And of course he's like, okay, that means I gotta play classical music only. Not a whole lot of jazz French horn players out here. Nope, I'm not gonna do that. So he went down to the conservatory that was a part of Butler University, not far from downtown Indy, close, within 5 miles of downtown. And that is where he studied with the principal trumpet player of the Indianapolis Symphony. And so he's getting great fundamental instruction from a great classical player. So he's getting all the great classical literature, all the great classical methods. He's probably spending tons of time in the Arbor method book and in the Clark method book, and he's developing all this fluency and technique with his fingers on the horn and all this strength and range and flexibility. His lip surge were absolutely phenomenal and breathtaking, his flexibility, breathtaking, his power, breathtaking. that big, fat, open sound he got, breathtaking. He grew to love a specific instrument, very similar to one I played, trombone. It's called a 8B artist trumpet. It is just behind the constellation level of trumpet. The difference is the constellation is a tank. It's heavy, and it takes tons of air to fill up. We call that thing old Ironsides. When I was a kid, I had a chance to buy either the Constellation or the 6H. I chose the 6H, which is the same as the 8B trumpet line in the trombone. The 6H and the 8B, same level instrument. The difference is the 8B, like a 6H, is lighter. It's lighter. And it's easier to fill up. And Freddie, being a big, strong, well-trained musician, he could pretty much burst the seams of that thing. You could get whatever finish you wanted. You had a nice silver finish, and you also had that corn lacquer finish that you could choose. I think Freddie chose a silver finish, and many people mistakenly thought he played the Constellation as a result, because Constellation most always were silver. At any rate, that's what his equipment was. It may be noted that Lee Morgan is one of the jazz trumpet players who played that same horn, and this Con 8B was quite popular among jazz trumpet players in the 60s because it was so light, it was easy to handle, and maybe because some bad cats were playing it, like Freddie Hubbard and Lee Morgan. You can't do much better than that. So while at the conservatory and studying, he's also hooking up with the Montgomery brothers, Wes Montgomery, Monk Montgomery, and Buddy Montgomery, and they're playing local gigs at George's Bar over on Indiana. Yeah, they're playing local gigs there. Everyone played there. Everyone knew it was a very popular joint. And eventually, after playing there for a while, the Montgomery brothers made an album called Montgomery Brothers plus 5 others. Freddie is on that album, as well as his lifelong friend on alto sax and flute, Mr. James Spalding, and that really made it work really well. He had a group with Larry Ridley. I think it was called the Jazz Contemporaries, pretty much the same cats. Larry Ridley playing bass and pretty much managing the group. And they're playing great gigs everywhere. Some of you may know Larry Ridley from all of the great Lee Morgan albums and many, many others, and the fact that he is a professor emeritus in jazz studies at several colleges around the New York City area, especially Rutgers. So, and still living and still very active on the jazz scene. Larry Ridley, great, great man, and very strong about what jazz is and what it should be and what it's not. Very, very strong on all those accounts. So Freddie is coming up as a young man with a great supporting cast. Montgomery Brothers, Larry Ridley, James Spalding, and many, many others who were a part of the local scene there in Indy. Somewhere around 20 years of age, 1958, I think, he decided that he was ready. And so he struck out for New York City. You know, I can handle Indy, let me go to see what I can do in the Big Apple. And as soon as he gets there, he's working with the biggest names in New York. Like, quick and in a hurry. Everybody wants a piece of this young cat from Indy named Freddie Hubbard. He's working here, he's working there. He's having a great time. His reputation is getting bigger. People cannot believe his technique, his control, his power, his creativity, his lyricism, just so many tools, so many weapons that he had at his disposal. And like right now, he had those things. So as he is expanding his reputation, he catches the eye of the Dark Prince of Jazz, Mr. Miles Davis. And Miles goes, oh man, that's a bad cat over there. That's a bad cat over there, man. So Miles does what Miles does. He goes to Blue Note and says, I got this bad cat. You all need to go give him a contract. And based on that, a new album is released called Open Sesame. Boom! Freddie is a big hit. His first album is like, wow. And pretty soon there's a second and a third called Hubcap, and Freddie is now on the scene. His recorders are getting out there. People are listening, and now he is even more in demand. What did I say? More in demand. Say it one more time. More in demand. Now, so we're going through the 60s, and he's playing with this one, and he's playing with that one, and he's doing tours with people like Quincy Jones through Europe and things like that, and he's playing with all kinds of other musicians that he has met at gigs and jam sessions and recording with just about everybody and doing tours. Man, Freddie is just really, really doing it. Somewhere around 1971, I guess, Lee Morgan leaves the Jazz Messengers. And it wasn't because of his death, because Lee did not die until 1972. So Freddie steps into Lee Morgan's seat in the Messengers. That's big responsibility. And recorded several very important albums with the Messengers in that 70 to 75, 76, the 60, 65, 66 era. He stayed with them until, let me make sure I have it right. He stayed with them until about 66. So, excuse me for my error, it's actually 61, not 71, and 62 for the death. So there he is, and he's with Bohanna. He's there for a lot of years, makes a lot of great music. Things are going really, really well, and he's touring with Quincy and doing all kinds of other gigs with other people because he had a wide range of stuff. Remember, he also had a classical background, so he can do all kinds of music. He starts playing with different kinds of people. Around 1970, when music is beginning to change. What do I mean, beginning to change? Well, acoustic bass players are slowly being replaced by electric bass player. Or if you're like a Ron Carter, you play both acoustic and electric, depending on the situation. In other words, we have instruments that need to be plugged in order for you to hear them coming into jazz. Before the 70s, almost everything in jazz was acoustic. Even Freddie Green played acoustic guitar. Charlie Christian amplified his because he was soloing, but the rhythm guys always played acoustic. So jazz, straight ahead jazz, is going from acoustic to electric. And there's Freddie. There's a guy named Creed Taylor, very smart producer, businessman. He launches a company called CTI. And he is spearheading this pulse of the new thing. He's got Hank Crawford. He's got Esther Phillips. He's got Stanley Tarantine. He's got Aieto. And with Aieto comes his wife, Flora Purim. He's got Johnny Hammond. He's got a lot of cats that are doing what we call soul jazz. And he's got Freddie Hubbard. And Freddie hits the ground running. Bam! Tune called Red Clay. Ooh, Lord, Fred put a cadenza on that thing that showed his natural, okay, let me be careful, that showed his behind. He showed everybody what he had. His flexibility, his range, his creativity, that big fat sound, and then it had a groove. Baby, it had a strong groove. Because Indy is a groovy city. It also had a strong R&B connection in Indy. And Freddie Hubbard put his jazz with his R&B and had one successful album after like Straight Life. Successful. First Light. Successful. And many others, 70, 71, 72, 73, in those years, 74. I actually saw that CTI Winter Jazz in Cleveland. I wasn't living in the South during those years for a whole lot of really good reasons. And as a result, I got a chance to hear some real jazz. So I would drive from Erie, Pennsylvania to Buffalo or Pittsburgh or Cleveland or wherever. And sometimes right there in Erie, great jazz was there. Well, this was in Cleveland. And I saw that CTI live with Freddie Hubbard and Hank Crawford and a young guy who was going to introduce us to a new genre that will become known as smooth jazz, Mr. Grover Washington Jr. was also on that tour, and he's making a whole lot of big noise because he's got a big album out. And once again, it is on CTI. So CTI is really selling albums big time. And Creed Taylor's idea and his vision was very, very successful at this time. Now, initially, even the jazz cats liked the stuff that Freddie was doing with CTI. I mean, they could buy into the funk and the R&B, and they could buy into, the jazz, because no matter what the groove was, Fred was laying down some lines, laying down some harmony, laying down some ideas, laying down some melody, got a big fat sound, got that technique, got that range, got all that stuff necessary to make you go, oh yeah. But as we go through this, somebody got a little greedy. And they started watering things down more and more and more, and it went from being jazz funk or funky jazz to jazz pop. And that's when the critics went, no. When you start adding violins and cellos and flutes and oboes and all these melodious things that put you to sleep, or it should be elevator music, people are like, nah. So the stuff that Freddie did in the second half of the 70s was not as well received as the earlier albums, such as Red Clay and First Light and all that. So, and by the way, Ron Carter was on that tour as well, playing both acoustic bass and electric bass. Just great. Bernard Purdy, we called him Pretty Purdy. He was always there, keeping that thing real, keeping that groove real, keeping that soul real. But once they went into the whole pop thing, some of the better musicians were no longer in those grooves. And so Freddie got some pretty serious criticism and didn't get any real great sales. About that time, there was a resurgence, believe it or not, of acoustic jazz. There was this group of musicians that had played with Miles Davis in the late 60s. Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter, Tony Williams, of course, can't forget Tony. And in the late 70s, they put together a reunion band called VSOP. But Miles wouldn't do it. Miles was solidly in the electric clamp, and he wasn't going to do that acoustic jazz anymore. And that was that. So what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to go get Freddie Hubbard. So Freddie Hubbard becomes Miles Davis in the VSOP, and the best albums they had were the live albums. I think they did 3 of them, and they're classics. I have all of them on vinyl, and they are classics. And the individual playing and collective playing is at the very highest level. So all of a sudden, at a time when Freddie had sold his soul to the pop world and was getting a scorn of all jazz musicians, he gets this opportunity to do real jazz with some real bad cats, and boom, Freddie's back. He's back, baby. Now, you need to know that this VSOP was great for several reasons, not just because the musicians themselves individually were so great, but they had been around each other for many, many years. You see, you were going to find that Freddie Hubbard first met Wayne Shorter in The Messengers, when Wayne was playing with The Messengers. And he pretty much introduced Herbie Hancock to the world with one of his early albums, and got Herbie his first little contract. So on the first 2 or 3 albums that Herbie Hancock did, Freddie is there. Freddie is there. All that Watermelon Man stuff, Freddie is there. Maiden Voyage, Freddie is there. Taking Off, the whole album, Freddie is there. So they go way back. And so when they got a chance to reassemble to do this special thing in memory of perhaps the greatest acoustic jazz combo ever, the Miles Davis Band of the late 60s, they were all ready to do it. And Freddie was in top form, man. He's playing his butt off. Yeah, he's playing his butt off. And so Freddie, he does that, and then he forms another band, and he does that, and then he hooks up with a guy named Al Hall Jr. I'm going to give a shout out to Florida State University and Florida A&M University. See, Al Hall Jr. is a trombone player. And he started his education at Florida A&M. But the college was a little hostile to jazz musicians when he was there, as it was when I was there. But as a freshman, I met Al Hall Jr. because he had been in the jazz quintet that had won the Notre Dame Jazz Festival Best Soloist, everything the year before. He was a 21-year-old pipe-smoking trombone player, really cool cat. He ended up transferring to Florida State, getting his degree, and later becoming a trombone player in Freddie Hubbard's band. So after doing all this work with VSOP, Freddie decided that he needed to get back into the funky land. So he gets a new recording company called Fantasy. He'd already done some Blue Note. He'd already done some Atlantic, so now he's with Fantasy, and the first thing he does is called Splash. And he goes to California and plays with a band that has been put together by Mr. Al Hall, plays some compositions and arrangements by Al Hall, and Al Hall Jr. produces Freddie's first album on Fantasy, For Old Time's Sakes. It's a decent album. It gets him back into the funk thing one more time. People who wanted that kind of thing, they kind of did it. I think this was probably 80, 81, somewhere in there. You know, Freddie continued to play with just about everybody. He played with people as diverse as Ornette Coleman on the Free Jazz album. He played with Don Cherry. So he could play free jazz, experimental jazz, straight down the middle, funky, like you wanted to be jazz, burn out, bop, hard bop, post bop, pop, funk, acid jazz, if you want to call it that. He could do anything because he could play the living heck out of the trumpet. In his later years, he's touring as usual. He got back with the Messengers in '88. I would assume this would have been after the departure of the young trumpet genius Wynton Marsalis. Wynton had been in the band for a while. And after Wynton left, sometime after that, Freddie came back into the band and did a tour or two with the Messengers. And that was recorded somewhere around 1988. Same kind of thing with a Japanese American a group of musicians in Japan. Rufus Reed, Ron Carter, of course, Elvin Jones, Sonny Fortune, they're all in that collection of musicians, and that was actually recorded. Later on, he did a tour and ended up doing some things in Warsaw, Poland, in the news now, and not for jazz. But the Polish are not just fans of freedom and Ukrainians, they're also fans of jazz. And I think we have to agree that if you love jazz, you love freedom. And if you love jazz, you love democracy, because that's what jazz is. Freedom, democracy, oh yeah, and some blues and swing, baby. Anyway, that's my political announcement. Warsaw, Poland. And that album is recorded as well. You can find it. Got a very interesting multicolored album cover. Very, very easy to find and identify. And it's live, it's recorded well. It's really great music. He later works with Mr. Weiss. I think his name is Dave Weiss, another trumpet player in the Creative Jazz Composers Octet. By this time, Freddie has had a couple of, he's getting older and he's getting a little sloppy. And he'd always been plagued, worried, and haunted by what happens to a trumpet player's lips. Most guys use this DLT, daily lip treatment, to keep your lips lubricated and healthy. You put metal on your lips, you put a lot of pressure, and you can do some damage. And Freddie used a lot of pressure. He did it on purpose, to play high, to play strong, to do what he wants to do. But it can leave some bumps on your lips. And if you're not careful, those bumps can get infected. And if they do, you can be off that horn for a while. Miles had 2 or 3 of those bumps on his lip. Look at any good album cover close up and you can see them. Louis Armstrong had a major one, and many people claim it may have been cancerous. And I remember Freddie talking about when he was at Warsaw, they had this big montage of Louis Armstrong behind the stage. And every time he would walk on stage, he would see Louis there with that divot in his lip, and he would put his head down because by that time, Freddie had an accident and had lip problems too. And at first he took a month off and went back in the horn too quick, and this thing got infected, and then it burst on the very day that he had a television program being filmed. He had to go and change his white shirt because he had red all on it from his blood, and he had to take time off. But let's say that his lip never really fully healed. And the power and control that he had as a young man, he never had again. So he had to learn to weave in and out of his lines like Freddie Hubbard. But yet, like Freddie Hubbard, who combined the work of Sonny Rollins in terms of his phrasing and lines with Brownie and his technique and movement and creativity and fluency and all of that. So Freddie had to figure some things out. And some of those things are, I'm not going to play so long and so hard. So he starts doing clinics and workshops at colleges, passing his knowledge on to a younger generation and not having to tax himself so much and do more injury to himself. By this time, he's having lung issues. He's having heart issues. He is having an issue with a pinched nerve in his neck that is affecting his mobility. He is obviously getting older and road weary, and he is deteriorating pretty quickly. He did get awards from the Jazz and Big Band Association, 1994. He did get a NEA, National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters Award, somewhere in 2006. 2008, he did have a heart attack, and a few weeks later, he passed away as a result. Couple of things that Freddie wants all of us to know. Jazz Association of America, Jazz Federation of America, you can Google that. They take donations. They support jazz musicians when they're down and out. And in Freddie's final year or so, he was not able to work. And this jazz foundation paid his mortgage for several months. And he's very thankful for that. And he would appreciate this if perhaps you might send them a donation so they continue to do this kind of work for other jazz musicians who find themselves unable to work because of illness or tragedy, etc. Because he says, had not been for them, he and his wife may have been homeless. So I'm going to try to see if I can't post a link to that organization, so maybe you all might want to contribute to it. It's not well known, but they do some really good work. Freddie Hubbard, born in Indy. Father moves out at 14. Goes to work stacking pins in a bowling alley, selling trash, junk, rubbish, whatever he can. Plays every brass instrument he ever saw except for the trombone. If it had valves, he played it, tuba, French horn, mellophone. But Lord, I am so happy that he did not take that French horn scholarship, that he played the trumpet and left us all of this wonderful jazz. I've done the best I can to catalog the tremendous work that he did. Here's what I can tell you. I may have mentioned 20 albums, in this little talk, Freddie Hubbard recorded over 300 albums. Yes, 300. With vocalists, instrumentalists, you name it. He is probably the most technically talented trumpet player of all time, with the exception of maybe Wynton Marsalis. And there's some people who will make that debatable because of how Freddie used his tools. He most certainly is one of the most respected jazz musicians that ever lived, and he is one of the trumpet players who took what Fats Navarro had done, what Dizzy Gillespie had done, what Clifford Brown had done, as a starting point to do what Ready Freddie could do at the drop of a hat. I can see him now with his tailored suit and his straw fedora, looking cool, walking to the microphone, stepping back a few feet because he knows how loud he plays, putting that horn to his face, and then drowning us in beauty, love, and awesomeness that could only come from Freddie Hubbard and his Con 8B. Thank you very much.